Hey guys, in this video, we're going to dive deep into typography. We're going to get into super detail and explain how other apps define their type scale, how do they use their font sizes, and how you can start creating your own, right? This is a lot of problem. This is a big problem that a lot of designers face. So we're going to get into details. And I've picked two apps that use font sizes, the type scale very differently. One is Airbnb and the other one I've picked is Instagram. And I'm going to talk about what sort of decisions should you make when deciding what font sizes to pick. And let's say you do have a type scale that is already set. How do you use that in your interface? What is the right way to use it? Okay. So what I've done here is I've taken this one screenshot and I've use the exact same font to find out the exact same font size. Now, if you want to do this for any other app, do use the exact same font that they are using, or else you will get wrong information and you will apply the wrong thing. So make sure you use the exact same font to, and get the exact same settings. Now, the first question that you need to ask yourself when you're designing any interface is, what is my primary text? Right? And in this case, the primary text is actually the name of the place. That is the primary information which the user is looking for, right? So I'm going to zoom in over here. And so Bengaluru, Puducherry, I think that's Kodaikanal, and I don't know what this is 16 pixels medium. Okay, 16 pixels medium. You also have a secondary information, which is 14 pixel book. Now, book is similar to 14 pixel regular, just some fonts have a font size that says book, right? Now, since these two are sort of accompanying each other, right, there needs to be a certain level of hierarchy. And this is visual hierarchy. This is called information architecture in UI design. Right? Visual hierarchy is what, a lot of people call it. Now, there are three ways to create a visual hierarchy, and I'm going to show you an example for all of them. One is to reduce the font size, right? So here there is 16, 14. So that's one way to reduce visual hierarchy. The second way to have visual hierarchy is to reduce the font weight. So this was medium, this was book. Now there's another way you can even further reduce visual hierarchy is by reducing the the text opacity. So right here, both of these are the same color, 100% opacity, right? But you can reduce that a little bit further to a lower opacity. So maybe like 60% opacity or 70% opacity. So you basically have three ways: reduce the font size, reduce the font weight, and reduce the font color opacity, right? Those are three ways. Now in this case, they've used only two of them, which is medium to book, that's one way, and 16 to 14, which is another way. Now, could they have gone and reduced the opacity as well? Probably, but that might have been an overkill, right? So maybe that was not the best decision. So 2 out of 3 ways of reducing bringing in visual hierarchy is a good way to go. So that's what they have done. So you typically want to have all your primary text to be 16 pixels. Now, this again depends on app to app. Not every app needs to have 16 pixels. And I'm going to show you Instagram's examples where they do not use 16 pixels, right? They use a different font value. And of course, I'll tell you why they use a different number and not 16. Okay. So let's assume that 16 is our base. So whenever you're creating a type scale, if you feel your primary text should be 16 pixels, lock that. That is your starting point to creating a type scale. And I'm not saying 16 points. If you choose 15 pixels as your font size as primary, fix that. 15 is going to be a base. If you choose 14 as your primary text, lock that. That's going to be your base. So in this case, they've used 16 pixels. So let's keep that as 16. Now, you have Explore Nearby, okay, which is the sort of the title, okay. Now, of course, they've used 22 pixels, which is quite big, and that looks fine, right? There's good visual hierarchy. You clearly know that this entire thing is a section of nearby places, and Bangalore, Puducherry is one of these places. Now, a rule of thumb that a lot of designers use is to have a maximum gap of 4 pixels, okay? A maximum gap of 4. Now, between 16 and 14, you have 2 pixel gap. But between 16 and 22, you have 6 pixels gaps. So is Airbnb trying to break the mental model or the norms or the industry standard? They are not, right? And I'm going to show you why they are not, right? In the next screen. But for now, this is how it is. So again, you have another section, you have 22 pixel, and again, 16 medium. So 16 medium over here, 16 medium over here. Primary information, outdoor getaways, the name of this card, unique stays as another one. If they had another secondary information, that would have been 14 pixel book. Okay. You also have 10 pixel bold and regular, which is for your tabs. This is quite standard across all apps. They have 10 pixels as the lowest. Do not go below 10 pixels ever. And I will show you, why you shouldn't go below 10 pixels as well. But the selected tab has bold, and the unselected tabs have 10 pixels. So here they're also creating some sort of visual hierarchy. And as you can see over here, they're using two different ways. Here they are not changing the font size, but they're changing the font weight, and also they're changing the font opacity, the text opacity. So here also they've used 2 out of 3 methods. Here also they have used 2 out of 3 methods. Okay, and typically 2 out of 3 methods is what you want to use. You don't want to use all the 3 methods of reducing visual hierarchy. So just 2 out of 3 methods should be fine. Now let me go to the next screen. Okay, which is basically just another section when I scroll. So again, another section, you have 22 pixel bold. They have a tag over here, which is 10 pixels. Okay. Now, if you see 14 minus 10 is 4, which is the maximum distance that you want to have. So 14 minus 10 is 4, which is a good gap. So that's okay. They could have made this 12 as well, but I guess they, chose to go with 10 because they felt 10 was better, and that's totally fine. Now here again, 16 pixel medium, 14 pixel book. Pretty much what we saw here, 16 pixel medium, 14 pixel book. They're following the same thing. Now here, 22 pixel bold again for the section. Here, they're using 16 pixels, but they're using the book font weight. They're not using medium. Until now, we were looking at medium, and we were looking at medium. But here, we have 16 pixels book. Okay, and I'll tell you what's happening here. And then you have, so the way, if you look at this, the way it's structured, for guests is one title. Okay, stay informed is the main section title. And under for guests, you have a couple of list items. And for hosts, you have a couple of list items. So here, in this case, our COVID-19 response sort of becomes our primary text. Now, if they had not used for guests or for hosts, they would have made this 16 pixels because this was our primary. But in this case, since there is a title, right, they are making this 14 pixels. Okay. Now, what if they had made this 16 pixel medium, right? And I'm going to show you an example over here. Now, this is the exact one that they have designed. Okay. And this is the one where I've made some changes. So this is 22 pixel bold as usual. This is 16 pixel medium, this one. Okay. And here is 14 pixel medium, which is your sort of your primary text. Okay. And here is your 14 pixel book. Now, if you see over here, this is easier to read and, sort of quickly, consume than this, because everything feels very black and bold over here. I don't see a good sense of visual hierarchy. Now, this is also bold and this is also bold, right? It's medium, but it's still sort of thick. So, right? So you want to create some good visual hierarchy between these two. And so they dropped it from medium to book. Okay. Now here, this is 14 pixel. Now, if you want to create hierarchy, right? Because this is the title and this is some information. And I think, I think it's a paragraph. Okay. I think it's a paragraph. So what they've done here is 14 pixels, the font size stays the same. Okay. But they have reduced the opacity over here to 60% and the font weight as well. So again, 2 out of 3 methods. The first method is font size, second method is font weight, third method is opacity. So here, since the font sizes are the same, which is 14, they've created hierarchy by reducing the font weight and the opacity, the other 2 methods, right? So that's why this is a lot more easier on the eyes than this, right? Cool. Now, moving on to the next one. This is their main details page. Now, for those of you who remember, I said that the maximum gap between font sizes should be 4. Here is your gap. Now, the reason they have 22 pixels is because they have an 18 pixels in the type scale as well. So 16 to 18, you have 2 pixels, and 18 to 22 is 4 pixels. Now this is the design decision that they have taken, right? They could have made the main section titles 20 pixels, but they chose 22 pixels because maybe they wanted even more emphasis, right? Now, if you look over here, we would ideally presume that this is 16 pixels, right? Because this is our primary information. But they have actually made it 18 pixels. So in this particular screen, 18 becomes your primary text, right? In this screen. But if you look at the font scale, they still have 16 pixel over here. So 16 pixels is still not gone, right? 16 pixels is still not gone, it's still there. Now, could they have made this 16 pixels? I believe they could have. But the only reason I feel they did not make the 16 was because the image was too big. And if they made it 16 pixels, and let's actually try that, right? Let's actually try this. If we sort of made this 16 pixels and made this also 16 pixels, right? Maybe it might have felt that this image was too heavy, but not the text information. So there's no good visual there's no balance between the big image and the text, right? So to introduce that good sense of balance, I'm guessing that's what they made it 18 pixels. Now, can you use 16 pixels? Sure, maybe, right? But again, it's up to you to decide what you want and what you think is good visual hierarchy, right? Now, here they've got book, right? Now, could they have made it medium? So if we go ahead and make this medium, for sure, you could have. But maybe they decided saying that, they're bringing too much hierarchy because there's 100% opacity, there's bold, and it's 18 pixels, might be an overkill, right? And maybe it's easier on the eyes if they made it 16 book font weight, because if you have two bold text elements together, it becomes a little bit hard to create that visual hierarchy, right? Because you have bold over here and you have bold over here, and this is 18 pixels. This is also 18 pixels, right? So you're not really creating very visual hierarchy over here. You're not reducing the font size, you're not reducing the font weight, you're not reducing the color, right? So they've just gone ahead and made this book, right? So that it's easy to create that visual hierarchy, and it looks fine as well. Now, can you tweak this a little bit? For sure, you can, but that's how they have gone and chosen to do this. Now, of course, price, quite important. So they've gone ahead and obviously increased the font weight to bold to give that emphasis, and that's pretty common. Now, the rating, they could have made this 16 as well, but typically this comes under the secondary information category. So secondary information is 14 is what they had decided. Primary is always 16. 14 is your secondary. And here again, COVID information is also secondary information, not primary in nature, right? Yeah. So if they had made this 16, right, it sort of still feels that all of them are the same font size, right? You can see that 4.8 is still almost, very close to the title. So to bring in that more visual hierarchy, they've reduced it by 4 pixels, right? So from 18, they've dropped it to 14 pixels, right? So that's how they sort of made the design decisions. Now, putting all the font sizes together, this is how they've done it. Now, what you need to understand is two things. One is that they just have very limited number of font sizes and font weights, right? Just very limited number. They've got 10 for the tabs, which, we don't need to consider that much because it's going to be used only on the tabs. They've used it over here as well. So cool, we can keep it. You have your primary, right? You have sort of like your second, like your, this is all this. So in this case, both of these are primary in this case, right? So this could be primary big and this could be primary small. This is your secondary information and this is your titles, right? Now, the other thing to note here is that the difference between font sizes, 22 minus 18 is 4, 18 minus 16 is 2, 16 minus 14 is 2, and 14 minus 10 is 4, right? So they're not crossing that 4 pixel gap limit. And even when they're using it over here across, they're not going beyond 4 pixels in visual hierarchy. They are sticking to that 4 pixel. But they start by identifying what is the primary. In this case, this was the primary. This was the second. This is also sort of primary, and this becomes the secondary, right? So yeah. So that's how they've defined. And you can just see they've used 2 font weights for each font size. Now, in rare cases, you can have 3 font weights, but try to have less number of permutation combinations as much as possible, right? Cool. Now let's move on to the next app, which is Instagram. Okay. Now Instagram does something different. Now, since Instagram is more of a photo and a video based platform, text is not really the emphasis. So their primary information, if you see, is all 14. They have defined their primary to be 14 and not 16, right? In our case, 16, but here there was 14. Now let's take a look at all of the elements. Now a post is the main, component, right? And the person who sort of posted the account is your primary information, right? So obviously they would make it bold, semi-bold in this case, right? There is a medium over here, but I think semi-bold and medium pretty much the same. But yeah, semi-bold is what they've gone for because that's the primary information. That's by whom the post is, okay? And now coming down again, likes is also a very important data point that everybody looks at. It is sort of considered as primary information. And of course, this is the comment. So when you have a comment, you have the name of the person, which is primary. And then the actual comment or the message or the tagline or whatever it is becomes your becomes regular, right? So they're creating that visual hierarchy. Now, view all 75 comments and more. They have dropped the emphasis even more by dropping the opacity, right? Because if everything was white, there's no visual hierarchy. If everything was white, there's no, visual hierarchy as such. So this is how they made decisions. So they have defined 14 to be their primary, okay? And since they're slowly reducing emphasis one by one, they have reduced the font weight and then they've reduced the opacity, okay? Now over here, the story, in your stories, the name of the person is 12% because this ideally should not compete with this. 14, this is primary. This stories is sort of secondary if you look at the entire screen. Because if you give everything 14 and give everything emphasis, then technically nothing has emphasis. So you have to create that emphasis. And so since this is primary, this section, stories becomes your secondary, right? Because stories is not really the primary thing when compared to Instagram posts, right? So they've reduced it. All right, so let's move forward. And this is the profile tab, okay? Now, again, over here, if you see, so again, primary information. What is the primary information? It's basically the account information. So my name and other information. And they've made all of this 14. Now, could they have made it 12? Probably they could have made it 12. But 12 becomes very hard to read when you have too much of content, right? Since there's a lot of text, making everything 12 might be, too less. Might be too hard to read. So they've kept everything at 14 pixels. But at the same time, they've created that visual hierarchy with the change of the font weight and the change in the font opacity. So they're using those two methods. Here they are not playing with font size, but they're playing with the font weight and the font opacity, right? Here, statistics are sort of considered the main information here as well. Even though the name is the primary, people, do look at stats a lot. Of course, Instagram is a social media platform. Stats are given emphasis. So instead of going 16, they've bumped it up to 18. Could they have used 16? Maybe they could have used 16, but they wanted to give it a lot more emphasis. So they used 14. They used 18 semi-bold, and they've reduced the font size by 4 pixels, method 1, reduce the font weight, method 2, but they haven't reduced the font opacity, right? So the concept of reducing visual hierarchy is still being applied even in these big apps, okay? And of course, you have 24 pixel bold, which is, the sort of the username or the handle, because that's what this page is about, right? This is sort of very similar to Instagram's logo. If Instagram was a font size, was an actual text, then this would be the same size as this. So this is this is sort of like your section title, because this is like the entire page, right? So there needs to be a hierarchy as well. So, what is this page? Is it profile? It is account? Is it settings? It is, browse? Is it search? Whatever it is, right? So this sets context to everything. And here the highlights, also these are 12 pixel, because again, they're not as primary. These are sort of secondary in nature. Because the information about the account is primary, this becomes secondary. And for CTAs, they've used 14 pixel semi-bold. right? Because it looks, like big and buttony and you feel like tapping on it. It gives that emphasis that it's a very strong button. Cool. So if you look at Instagram, they've hardly used any, bunch of font size. It's very simple. You have 14 primary, semi-bold and regular, which is your main font sizes, primary. 12 becomes your secondary. 18 pixels sort of becomes title 1, right? And 14 pixels becomes sort of like your title 2. If you see here, they are breaking that norm of having that gap of 14 pixels, so gap of 4 pixels. So you have 18 pixels, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. They're using a gap of 6. Could they have used 22 as well? Yes, they could have, but maybe they intentionally chose to break it and go another 2 extra pixels further. And that's totally okay. That's a design decision. As long as there is good visual hierarchy being maintained, it should not really be a problem, right? That's the objective. So how far can you go until it becomes too much, or how less can you go until, you don't see that hierarchy anymore, right? So that's how you want to sort of take decisions. Now, moving forward, we also have these guidelines that were given by Apple and Google. Now, the left one is material design and the right is human interface guidelines. Now, they have a lot of font sizes. Now, this does not mean you use all. This is for you to sort of pick, and see what works for you. Now, a lot of companies, a lot of apps and products, they don't follow these guidelines. And that's totally okay, because they are guidelines, are not rules to be followed. It's up to you if you want to use it or not. Now, if you see over here, their primary information, right, is body 1, right, which is 16 pixels, and subtitle 1, which is 16 pixels. And both of them are regular and regular. The only difference is the letter spacing. So typically both of them are pretty much the exact same thing. And then you've got body 2, which is your secondary information, which is 14. You have button, which is 14. But can you make your button 16, same as primary? Yes, you can, right? So you can clearly see that there's 16, 14, and then 14, and then 12, and then 10. And they do not go below 10. So never go below 10. And this depends on your fonts. So if you have if your font is sort of big, as in not the font size, the structure of the font itself, if it is big, then, go max 10. So go max to 11 or 12. But if you feel it's, if the structure of the entire font is small, cap it at 10, right? Don't go below 10. That's one thing you want to do. And of course, you've got 6 different types of headings. You've got 20, 24, 34, 48, and all this stuff. And as you can see, Airbnb used 22, which is not a part of the material guidelines, but that's totally okay, right? It's up to you to break that if you want, or you can follow it to the dot if you really want to. If you look at the human interface guidelines, they do things a little different. Their primary itself is 17, okay? And the primary itself is 17, and then you still have multiple font size, which is 15, 13, 12. But you also have another font size, which is 16, which is called callout, and you can consider that your primary as well. But the point is to know that 16 is sort of the base standard that's there everywhere. The other thing I want to note is that, show you guys, is that whatever fonts they used, right, in the Typescale, there are no 2 fonts where the gap is 1. It's a minimum of 2, right? So there's no 18 and 17. There's no 16 and 15. There's always 2 font size gaps. Same thing over here. 14 and 12, 14 and 18, 18 and 24. There's no gap of 1. It's always a minimum of 2. And here, even though they're saying 16 and 15, it's not that you have to use 16 and 15. You could use 16 and 13, or you could use 15 and 13, or you could use 15 and 12. It's up to you to decide what font size you want, right? And now this typically is created for the SF Pro or, San Francisco font typeface. This is specifically for that. So which means that if you use a different font, you might not have to follow these values. And same thing over here, this is made for Roboto. As you can see, the typeface, this is made for Roboto. So if you're not using Roboto, you may or may not choose to follow this. It's totally up to you, right? So if I were to make a font scale out of this, I would make 16 my primary, 13 my secondary, 11 my tertiary, and maybe I would use 20 and 22 as my other 2 titles. So you can go and pick ones that you want, and you could apply the same thing, right? And here the weight is regular all across, but you can go ahead and give that extra emphasis by you could make this bold or, black or extra bold or whatever to create that extra sense of hierarchy, like as we saw over here. Now, just because this was 16 medium does not mean that this had to be 22 pixel medium, but it's just that they wanted to give it even more emphasis, right? So they've gone ahead and made it, increase the font size and increase the font weight as well, right? So this is how you go about and creating your Typescale. Hope you guys really enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, do definitely reach out to me on Discord and DM me. And I'll see you guys in the next Loom video.